Bono is very articulate. He's a sponge for information. He's incredibly eloquent. He has a very, very wide-ranging vocabulary.
I think Bono is really popular because he makes great music, the band make great music, and because they do so with a real conscience. They do care about the world.
You're a performer, you know, if you're you perform, it's like being an actor. If you're in a small club, you perform one way. I mean, maybe Bono kind of tended to perform as if he was in an arena when he was in a small club. That might have been a bit big for it, but eventually he found his range, and his range is, you know, the big stage.
He's also very capable of expressing what seem to be very personal emotions in a way that allows you to think the song is about you.
Music is not an end in itself, and he's made that absolutely clear. And I think because of that, they make even better music and people really appreciate it.
I think Bono feels very privileged, you know. His children are healthy, his marriage is healthy. He's married to a very beautiful girl. He's managed to stay living in his hometown.
I think people fell in love with the music of U2 first. But Bono is the focal point in the group. He has a huge amount of charisma, and he has the capacity to inspire a combination of passion and faith in people.
He's got a lot of dough, and I think he feels privileged, and his heart is genuinely touched by poverty and by sickness and injustice. I mean, he's genuinely moved by it. That thing that moves, for instance, a freshman student, still moves Bono.
Bono's involvement put us on the global map as opposed to the UK map, I think. We suddenly started getting, as I said, letters from Argentina, Japan, places where we had no presence whatsoever, and it was purely because our address happened to be on U2's album sleeve.
He's done a tremendous amount to articulate a sense of being from Ireland and what that means and how you feel about it. And he has articulated that in song and word.
I think the fact that he sings, that he writes, that he is the main spokesperson for the band makes him, you know, there would not be a U2 without Bono, put it that way.
Bono is the epitome of a rock and roll star. As the lead singer of U2, the biggest band of the last 20 years, Bono has lived a life in which he's helped influence the direction of music, not only by writing songs about love, but also about peace and freedom. He is not only the front man for U2, but also their spiritual guide. With his quick tongue, vocal opinions and sly smile, he is indeed Mr. Charisma. Bono once famously said that all you needed to succeed in rock and roll was 3 chords and the truth. But to reach the level of U2, you also need determination. Bono was born Paul David Hewson in Dublin on the 10th of May 1960. The family home was at number 10 Cedarwood Road in Ballymun, a suburb of North Dublin. With a Protestant mother and Catholic father, Bono grew up with a strong religious faith, but avoided becoming attached to one particular religious denomination. Tragically, while Bono was only 14, his mother Iris died of a brain hemorrhage. This event would shape his life forever.
I was born in Ballymun, and just in between Ballymun and Finglas. I'd heard of this fella called Paul Hewson, like he was fairly notorious.
During the mid-70s, Bono attended Dublin's Mount Temple Secondary School. Due to his loud character, he received the nickname Bono Vox after a hearing aid sold in a store in Dublin. This was later shortened to Bono. Donald Moxham was Bono's teacher at Mount Temple.
My memories of Bono are certainly I taught him history up to Leaving Certificate Standard, an extremely dynamic, interested student in the classroom. Challenging in a very positive way, and that's genuinely what I can remember about him.
While attending Mount Temple, he would meet his best friends, all destined to become his fellow members of U2.
It was a very, I would say, progressive school, and that was largely due to the first principal of the school, John Brooks.
At Mount Temple, there was open discussion of ideas, individuality was encouraged, and different opinions tolerated in an atmosphere free from the bigotry and discrimination found elsewhere.
I'm an Irishman and I live in Ireland, and I believe in the country north and south, so, you know, I'm literally, you know, torn in two about it myself.
About 1976, I was approached by Larry Mullen, and he said that he and a group of others were forming a band, and they wanted permission. They had asked the principal, again, John Brooks, could they practice in the school? And John Brooks said, yes, you can practice, but he said, you must get a teacher to accept responsibility for you. Larry approached me, and so I accepted responsibility for them. That really meant they practiced in that room down there, and I would open the door on a Saturday and a Wednesday. They would practice here for a few hours, and then I would lock up after them and basically supervise their making sure everything went according to plan. And that went on for a few years.
We pushed for things that nobody else did. We asked for things that people hadn't asked for before, so teachers and that sort of said, well, you can't do any harm and all that sort of stuff. So got things like rooms to rehearse, and that's about it. Just things like rooms, we're able to stay there late.
Jerry Ryan is Ireland's #1 radio personality and a close personal friend of Bono's.
The first time I ever saw the band, if I recall, this would have been a hybrid of U2. And of course, it was Larry Mullen's band at the time. And I think maybe some of the Virgin Prunes might have been playing with them. Or maybe it was the Edge's brother, Dick Evans, who's also a guitar player. And I saw them playing at a school dance in Mount Temple, which was just down the road from where I lived and from where I went to school.
There are a lot of people in this city a lot worse off than we were. Okay, you know, we never got anything given to us on the plate, anything. But there's a lot of people far worse off than we were, so I think it would be wrong for me, for Larry to talk about the old days in any sense of we overcome all these obstacles. There were a lot of obstacles to overcome, but there are other bands out there that are, you know, fighting for the price of strings.
If you ask me, did I expect them to become famous? The answer is no. I didn't think to be. I thought it was a phase they were going through, and that they would get it out of their system, but I still support them. It was something, they were enthusiastic about it, so I would encourage them in their enthusiasm.
People forget that this was still pretty much a kind of hippie time. It was the time of Steve Hillage and Camembert Green and the Electric Teapot and Tangerine Dream. I mean, you know, when we think back to those days, it's incredible that U2 developed out of this kind of mixture of punk and hippiedom.
We never ever sat down and thought about, wow, this would be a great sound. I mean, we were basically influenced by things like seeing the Pistols or the Clash or even the Jam on Top of the Pops, saying, wow, this is something new. So we would just come out of like the whole hippie dippy thing into the new wave as such. So like we were fairly directionless.
Because Ireland always tended to embrace pop culture in waves, so that one culture would be overlapping the other, where if you were living in London, there were always very defined lines. You know, it was either hippie, punk, ska, beat, but in Dublin there'd be always this melange, and they came out of this kind of melting pot of several different cultures.
I don't know whether I have had an influence. I would love to believe that U2 wouldn't have made it without me. They would have made it probably without Mount Temple, But I think they were determined to do well, to make it.
In 1977, the Irish music scene was undergoing a radical change. The band, which was at this point named Feedback and later renamed The Hype, were in the middle of this musical melting pot. Creativity seemed to be emerging out of nowhere. Dublin was becoming special. Dave Fanning, now a world-famous rock DJ, was at the time running a pirate radio station.
I don't know, what was probably so special about Dublin in the mid-70s was the fact that most people grew up with the influences of American stuff on television and English stuff through a lot of other stuff. And we were a million miles from anything like that at all. We were a million miles certainly from America, and London and Dublin, say, which is a good example, they were poles apart.
So you were being exposed to American television, you were being exposed to the Beatles' revolution, you then were being constantly reminded of Irish culture and its Celtic roots and the mysticism that's attendant on that, and also the repression and the anal retentive nature of Irish society at that time.
Well, there was an exploding punk scene in Ireland at the time. I mean, the thing began in New York in '75 or thereabouts with the emergence of the Ramones and Patti Smith and television and bands like that. Was picked up in the UK through '76 and filtered through to Ireland.
There were a number of bands and singers that had been able to break through into chart success, and U2 were no different than anybody else at that point in time. They were a bunch of young wannabes.
After leaving Mount Temple School, Bono and the band became regulars in the various pubs and clubs in and around Dublin. It was these humble stages that would act as a training ground for the young group. Eventually, they attracted the attention of a young entrepreneur, Paul McGuinness, who became their manager.
In order to achieve creative satisfaction, it was vital that they were in charge of their own affair.
1979 was probably the point at which punk had sophisticated itself into new wave with a vengeance. So you know, the bands that were making all the running were, I think, the Boomtown Rats, for instance. I can't remember. I don't remember. Some of their number ones would have been in 1979, maybe some were in '78. But that kind of act was much more successful than the raw punk thing.
Bono made the comment at one stage to me, Bob Geldof made a salesman out of me, and that was one thing that the Boomtown Rats did. They created an awareness that you've got to go out and work the turf aggressively, win an audience, force record company people to listen to you if need be, and if you did that and did that effectively, then there was a far greater likelihood that you could actually make a career of rock and roll, which people in Ireland had only done very sporadically up to that point.
In 1979, Chaz de Wally was a 25-year-old A&R man for CBS Records.
Myself and a colleague from the A&R department at CBS by the name of Howard Thompson were both sent over to go and have a look at U2. The band wasn't brilliant. They were loud and they were fast and they clattered along and they were sort of like a Division 2 new wave band of the era. Bono was particularly outstanding. I guess he was mesmerising. The attention was entirely upon him and upon him only, and he had this whole vocabulary of dramatic gestures on top of the standard sort of rock and roll shapes that you expect from lead singers in pop or new wave or whatever bands. You know, he knew when to do things in slightly slow motion. He wasn't frenetic. He had all sorts of little moves which turned into fairly standard post-new wave things that singers did. There was a thing about clutching your forearm and doing like this, which the guy in Simple Minds codified much later on, but Bono was doing all that kind of stuff. And I remember saying to Howard, he's either going to be the sensational Alex Harvey, which means he'll have a couple of big hits, big theatrical rock hits, and then vanish, or else he's going to be someone like David Bowie. He's going to be in there and he's going to be laying down some landmarks as to how performers appear on stage and should appear on stage, and adding to the standard vocabulary of rock. He's going to do, he's going to be in for the big one. And I stand by that statement, and I like to think that it turned out to be true.
One of the things that was also striking about U2 was that they were prepared to take risks, and Bono in particular was prepared to take risks as a front man. And there were a lot of people in and around the Dublin scene who didn't like U2, and there were a lot of people who saw Bono and the rest of the guys in the band as spoiled middle class guys pretending to be punks, and that was unfair and it was wrong.
Everyone has their own original way about them. If they just apply that to their music will be as original.
I thought the band had a lot of promise. Paul said he'd get some good studio time in Windmill Lane, so I went back to London and said, look, this is a doddle, this isn't going to cost us anything. And we're going to do we could do with these guys exactly the same as we do with the young British band that we're looking at, spend £100 demoing them. But the advantage will be that we can have those tapes that we can make in Ireland, we could have them for a record release in Ireland, where the band is currently the hottest thing. So how do we lose?
U2, they were now ready for their first big break, the Evening Press Harp Lager Talent Contest in Limerick, to be held on St Patrick's Day, March 1978. Against admittedly poor competition, the band won, taking home £500 and the promise of a demo session with CBS Ireland. Finally, U2 found themselves at a very important stage in their career. They were in the studio for the first time, about to record a demo for one of the biggest record companies around. Those years of hard work were about to pay off, or so they thought. The recording would not be without its problems.
For that first recording session at Windmill Lane, we did 3 songs. We did Out of Control, Stories for Boys, and Boy Girl. So we did these 3 tracks. And Boy Girl and Stories for Boys worked fine. I can't remember whether they got a backing track in 3 takes or 4 takes or whatever, but basically speaking, it was not a problem. But unfortunately, Out of Control had a section in it, 3/4 of the way through, where the whole band breaks down. Because there was this problem with Out of Control, we had to do it again and again and again and again, and we all began to get a bit angry and irritated and frustrated and whatever. And Bono kept telling me that Larry, he has drumming lessons with the best drummer in Dublin. I can't believe that he's not in time, but he wasn't. And without it being in time, then the track would not, it wouldn't be worth having. So we persevered, and I believe that I may have been somewhat harsh in my manner. I really don't know, but and I have read subsequently that that Bono wanted to stick one on me because of my manner, because I was effectively being rude either to or about Larry. I don't, I've read that. I don't remember it at the time, but it's quite possible. But it was a bit of an anxious moment for everybody. But finally, we did get a take that worked.
Following their demo, U2 were offered a deal with CBS. 3 tracks were recorded for the first EP, and listeners to Dave Fanning's show on RTE2 were invited to select which track should be the A-side. This was good publicity, as well as making both the radio station and its listeners feel an early connection with the band.
For 5 nights of the week, the whole lot of them came in. I remember one night in the middle of summer, Edge dressed up as Santa Claus, and we all thought this was hilarious. I had no idea why. And they sat here and we just played the 3 songs every night for the listeners to decide the A side. This is in the old vinyl days now. The A side of the single, the B side of the single, and which song would be discarded. And as it turned out, they put 2 songs on the B side of the single and 1 song on the A side. The A side was Out of Control, and the B side was Stories for Boys and Boy Girl. I think Boy Girl was the one that didn't get many votes, but they put it on anyway.
In 1980, U2 released their first album. Boy announced the arrival of 4 young men from Dublin who would go on to conquer the world. Bono's clear, strong voice rings out over the anthemic arrangements. Though none of the band members had yet developed much instrumental facility, their commitment and emotion clearly shone through.
And I went to see one of my friends who lived around the corner from me, and he played me Boy. That just came out that day, and I was absolutely astonished how good it was. I couldn't believe that this record was, you know, how awesome it was by a band that I'd never heard anything by.
While not a huge seller, Boy was acknowledged as a classic debut album. The only concern was where U2 would go next. The band knew that the American market was the one that really mattered. They knew that they could break America.
And they signed a deal with Premier Talent, and this is what McGuinness did, which was the thing Bruce Springsteen was on. Of course, Bruce Springsteen was just becoming huge. Your man, whatever his name is, Cameron Crowe, or somebody had seen the future of rock and roll, and his name was Bruce Springsteen and all this. And Bruce was getting huge. And like, I remember thinking, like, this guy really seems to be like, he's way above my league. I wouldn't know how to go to Premier Talent in America. And it obviously worked brilliantly, because they conquered America almost, as far as I'm concerned, almost more than they conquered Britain, or before they did. Now, maybe it's 50-50, I don't know, but I'm just thinking, like, it was such an audacious move for an Irish band. I had never heard of that before, of more or less bypassing London, and they did.
And I think when they went to the United States, that's when some bands get it and some bands don't. They got it immediately.
U2 were finally on their way to becoming a hugely successful supergroup. America embraced the band, and they embraced America. It was the most important move the band had ever made.
They got popular in the United States first, really. They wouldn't have been anywhere near as big as they were if they hadn't cracked the US, and they cracked the US very early. They cracked the US partly because Bono is such a great stage performer, and they like big action in American rock, and he was swinging from rafters and climbing on amps and doing all sorts of stuff, and they loved all of that.
I find, I mean, I have a kind of love-hate relationship with America. I love it. I really love it. I mean, I hate the violence. I hate the people being gunned down in the street, the impersonal thing about living in tall buildings in small cities. But I love the wide open plains of America, and I find that the audiences are also wide open, quite naive, and quite up for you at the same time. They're not cynical in the way that, say, a London audience can be very cynical.
During this period in America, U2 were prolific, releasing a further 3 albums in 4 years. The album October was released in 1982, followed by War in 1983, and finally The Unforgettable Fire in 1984.
I think I was there the first time they played an arena, which was just south of Boston, and because they'd been doing smaller venues. Well, they were, you know, they just completely filled it. It was a natural place for them. It was a great concert. They blew the roof off.
Pretty soon afterwards, they were on the cover of Time magazine as Rock's hottest ticket. They brought out Wide Awake in America, that EP, and then it was the Joshua Tree, and of course all hell broke loose then.
In 1987, U2 released The Joshua Tree. This was to be their most successful album ever. Bono dealt in a biblical language of angels and devils, sexual desire and social injustice, and was fascinated by great American music in all its forms. Epic in both scope and intention, the Joshua Tree was undoubtedly a masterpiece.
The Joshua Tree certainly came about after the experiences certainly the band had had with Live Aid and then Bono going to Africa. It really changed their perception of world events. I think that's certainly reflected in the music.
They understood that if you're going to get 80,000 people standing up, cheering and shouting and singing along with your songs, they've got to be big. And I think that was the trip, the Joshua Tree tour in the States, and it was around that time that they really realised that whatever skills, whatever talents they had, whatever they were going to write about and sing about, whatever they felt passionate about, was important. But what was really, really important was that it was big. It was, the sound would be huge. And that's really what made it, because you had at the heart of it you had soul, but you also had soul on a gigantic scale.
Bono grew up brilliantly. He really did it well on that level. Just even the look, you know, the hair of the Joshua Tree, as I mentioned, all that was really good. He really became confident on stage. And he's a little guy, you know. He's not David Bowie, or he doesn't look like David Beckham, or he's not Sting or anything like that, you know. He's a small, ordinary, dumpy Dubliner, you know, in many ways.
It was during the years in America and his experiences in third world countries that started to change Bono. His songwriting matured. The biggest track on the album, however, is With or Without You, a nasty love song dressed up as an ode of devotion and care.
With or Without You, I think, is probably, for me, the finest moment so far. I think it's an incredibly powerful song. It's supposed to be about the violence of love, and it's very fierce in parts, which I like. It's got this fire about it.
They moved Americana on a step. They were Irish, but they took that whole Americana thing, which had been the country rock thing that the Eagles did, or whatever, and they took the essence of that and then they moved it quite seriously into, into another era.
After their great success abroad, it was time to come home. The concert they gave at Croke Park would go down in history.
I don't think it was until they played Croke Park, and if I recall, this was the homecoming gig after the Joshua Tree album, and this was an absolutely stunning concert, and it was on a very, very large scale. And a lot of people in Ireland were only familiar with small-scale festivals, or maybe some had travelled to see, you know, bands like maybe Pink Floyd or Genesis playing in Nebworth, and they might have been familiar with large shows. This was a gigantic show.
It was their homecoming gig, and in a way it was a coming-of-age moment for Bono. U2 were now the biggest band in the world, but there was something that the audience didn't know.
One thing I didn't want to do was announce that we were giving the money away from Croke Park before the gig, because it's our money to give away. You know, that was a point we had to make, and I don't know, it's very hard to justify being in a big group. I think we're really overpaid. I mean, I think we're really overpaid, and I can't justify the position. I mean, we wrestle with it all the time ourselves. The only answers we can come up with is we've tried to make the best records we can make. We tried to play the best live concerts we can play.
I remember thinking, well, these guys are going to be as big as the Rolling Stones. But it wasn't until that point that I actually realised this band is going to be phenomenally influential. They're also going to be very, very successful. They're also going to be incredibly rich. And it was at that moment, watching the closing notes of the Joshua Tree concert in Croke Park, that I realised. Now, maybe I was the last in Ireland to realise it, but it wasn't until that moment.
I think that Bono had, by this point, certainly at the Joshua Tree and Rattle and Hum, had attained public credibility. The Joshua Tree certainly was given unanimously the thumbs up by the music press. I know Rattle and Hum wasn't. But I think by this point that people took notice of him because he had something to say, but he didn't just talk about what he believed, he actually was seen to go and do things.
Bono's vision has broken free from the traditional limitations of what a rock band and rock music could and couldn't do.
All really great rock music, and thus really great rock musicians, but singers in particular, manage to tap into something which is slightly supernatural or something. It's not, you know, they rise above I'm just singing a song, and isn't it, they touch something, and you know, there's a point of transcendence almost. And Bono had that, and that's one of the reasons why he was immediately so impressive, because he wasn't just a singer singing a song, he was a man who was trying to impart something to you.
We tend to just all start up, everyone just plugs in and we just start playing. And then we play for about a half an hour, and sometimes people are playing different songs, but then at the end of the half an hour we play back the tape and we listen to the tape, and someone says, Edge, that was really good. And Edge goes, yeah, I think that was pretty good. And in fact, what you did there was pretty good. And we just literally with the needle and thread sew it together and it becomes a song.
But one of the problems with the early U2 stuff was that the lyrics tended to be improvised at the last minute, done on the mic, and very often the songs had an unfinished kind of quality to them. And you know, at times I think along the way Bono might have defended that as if it was a kind of a badge of honour, and you know, I really don't think it was.
By combining an original sound with honest lyrics and a challenging social message, U2 has earned the respect of their peers and critics, and an almost fanatical following from fans around the world.
And I think there was a point at which he began to recognise that to fashion lyrics and to craft lyrics would enable him to produce work that had a more lasting emotional impact on people.
He clearly was not just a singer singing a song. He was clearly a man who had something to add to the world.
The lyrics became Joycean, they became incredibly poetic. I mean, these lines like, you're an accident waiting to happen, and they're so evocative, they're so powerful. They reek of William Burroughs. You know, you don't have to hear the whole song. One line will do it. So that's a very powerful, you get the sound right, you get the evocation of emotion right, and you can't fail.
I mean, ultimately it isn't always the songs that are most popular that are the weightiest. But I think at this point, and it's something Bono has said himself, U2 have arrived at a place where they can write about anything and people are prepared to listen.
Whatever you see in U2 that works for you, that's okay. I think that's actually the strength of the group, is that there are different sides.
I went to see them at Slane a couple of years ago, and there was two women in front of me near the thing. And honestly, it was like, wow, like, is that what like total fan and hero worship is? They were crying. One of them was like this, half singing the songs like as though she was saying mass or something, and she was from South America or something. And I was like, get a life, you know, like it's just rock and roll. And somewhere like, okay, if it means that much to you, that's fine.
Bono has always been proud of his Irish roots. The relationship between music and national identity is a reoccurring theme in modern history, and Bono's global presence has done much to inform the world of what Ireland has to offer.
Well, I suppose they're the kind of Guinness of rock and roll. Don't forget they're an important, it's, you know, in the eulogy, you know, you've got to remember this is an industry, you know, they're worth hundreds of millions now. And they were Ireland's most important export at one stage, and they put Ireland on the map.
If you, went to the classic Midwestern American town 30 years ago and you asked, where's Ireland? A very small number of people would have been able to tell you where it was on the map, or anything much about it. And in the context of Europe, I'm not so sure that a whole lot of people would have immediately known where Ireland was either.
Well, I think that from their point of view, putting themselves forward as an Irish band was very deliberate. I think it goes back to control as well. I mean, the band are well known, they do control everything that they possibly can about the career and the way they actually manage themselves within the music industry and in terms of the media.
I think U2 have become a symbol of Ireland's new and powerful place in world markets, world economy. They've gone from being one of the poorer nations in Europe in the 50s and 60s. They're now, and to an extent the 70s, they're now a bustling economy. And I think that U2 are a symbol of that.
Well, the first thing is Irish people about Bono. He does say himself that he could walk down the street in Dublin much easier than he could walk down the street in London or New York or LA, which is definitely, I'd say, quite true.
Unfortunately, not everybody appreciates what Bono has achieved in the last 25 years.
Irish people have a very odd kind of a relationship with that kind of thing. They kind of go, Bono, you know, your last single was crap, or like they'd say that just, and they just walk on and keep doing their work as opposed to, whatever. They don't really, they're not. Well, maybe they are with some people, I don't know, but I don't think they are anyway with their own, let's put it that way. And he can live here much easier than he could elsewhere.
But people outside Ireland probably don't understand the huge level of begrudgery that there is towards success in this country. I mean, the band came in for a lot of criticism from certain newspapers, certain journalists took it upon themselves to wage literally a vendetta, a critical vendetta against them. And though they don't find themselves often in the gossip columns, they would be written about quite frequently in quite negative tones, and they'd be slagged off a lot. And I think what used to drive the Irish media around the twist was that they'd slag them off and then they'd come back with another incredible album.
They do always say they're an Irish band, and they correct anybody in the early days who said they were an English band. And you notice now, wherever they go, not that he was anti-English, it's just that's what he did, but wherever they go now, they always are referred to as an Irish band. So maybe the correction of the first few years that he used to do has paid dividends.
The Irish do not welcome their own profits. You have to work very hard. I think when they come back to Ireland, they have to work 10 times harder.
What they've done for Ireland is immeasurable, and it's absolutely huge. And maybe it's not specifically that they worked very hard to promote Ireland around the world, which I'm sure it isn't. All they did was be Irish, say they were Irish, and be massively successful. So they opened every single door possible. So they opened it for all kinds of crap and all kinds of good stuff to flow right through out of Ireland.
I believe Bono has contributed to the Irish identity purely by standing up and being counted, saying, I can do something about the way things are in the world, and I want to help. He wants to use his celebrity status to be noticed for the right reasons, for helping underprivileged people, going out to Africa, or whatever the case. And if people listen to him, then all the better.
I'm not going to get down and say, God, you've been a great ambassadors for Ireland, lads, as some politician would no doubt say, with a rosette in his bloody jacket trying to say, and here they are, freedom in the city. In fact, I did this thing, Freedom in the City, with them in Dublin. They got the freedom of the city. And it was like painful, all these people sitting in front in all these suits, and then all the kind of public behind, mostly from abroad, I might say. The Irish people didn't even bother turning out. And I was in a place called Smithfield in Dublin, a big kind of open market, and they actually played 5 numbers acoustically, which was brilliant. And of course, people from Sweden and Denmark and South America were thrilled with all this. But I mean, they did it when they got the freedom of the city. It was like, yeah, so what? It was like, it didn't mean anything to Irish people much, really. The Irish people don't care. And they really don't. But they know what U2 have done, and they've never let us down, if you like. And they've always been good about it, and it always has been a good thing for us. And there's nowhere you can go, anywhere in the world, that somebody, the minute you say you're Irish, they say U2.
separates Bono from any other run-of-the-mill rock star is his overwhelming commitment to changing the world and making it a better place. Our respect for Bono comes from the fact that he acts on what he says. Instead of simply signing over his name to causes like Third World debt elimination, world hunger, Greenpeace and Bosnia relief aid, he gets fully involved with his time and his money.
When I think of peace, I think of hippies with flowers in their hairs and everything, but I think you can be aggressive. You can be an aggressive pacifist, and I suppose in U2 that's we consider ourselves aggressive pacifists.
I think Bono has made the most of the opportunity that he's been given as the lead singer with the world's biggest rock band to try to make try to contribute to changes in world thinking on very important issues.
When Bono gets his teeth into something, he becomes extremely dogged, and he will pursue the cause or the issue relentlessly. And the reason that it's not naff, even if sometimes his posturing embarrasses his band or maybe even himself, is that he actually does have an influence. He can get to the President of the United States. He can sit down George Bush and say, look, you're going to have to do something about third world debt, and something happens.
It is the crumbs off our table that we offer these countries, and it is not good enough. The President of the United States doesn't think it's good enough. And I believe him when he says he is ready to do, to up the ante.
So it doesn't matter how naff people think the speech is, or how inappropriate they may think having artists, film stars or rock stars involved in politics. Bono is effective, so that makes it completely legitimate.
Stephen Rand is the campaign manager for the Jubilee Debt Campaign. The vision of this organisation is a world in which the people of the poorest countries are liberated from the crushing burden of debt, and in which the future financial arrangements between rich and poor nations are founded on fairness, accountability and transparency. On Wall Street. Bono has dedicated much of his time to pushing this cause forward.
I was at a meeting with that Gordon Brown, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the United Kingdom, organised, and Bono was there via a video link from Paris. And he made a comment then which I thought was really interesting. They were talking about Live Aid, and Bono made the comment that something more needed to be done because we didn't want to be the generation that betrayed its own heart. And I thought that was really interesting, because here was a group of rock singers who in 1984 came to make a record to raise money for Ethiopia. They did the concerts. Lots of people are now too young to remember it, but it made a big impact.
Live Aid proved that music can unite people towards very specific ends.
Bono is one of the few big rock stars left who is prepared to actually try and do things on the political stage, and who is accepted for doing that sort of thing.
And he's never forgotten the importance of that issue, along with Bob Geldof, who's obviously a friend, and he's worked on this issue as well. So I think it was that idea that if you cared enough to make a record, you cared enough to do a concert, you still need to care enough to keep going with the issue. And I think what's really impressive about Bono is that he hasn't just, done it once and then forgotten about it. He's kept going. He's taken an interest.
We know it's difficult. It's a steep incline, to climb Everest. It is a dream, but there's no honor in climbing halfway up, is there?
But the focus thing that he does about like third world debt and that, which was born those sort of 20 years ago now in those visits, I think, to Ethiopia, and that it's phenomenal the energy he has. It's phenomenal the doors he can open and the people he can get to meet, and the Newt Gingriches and the Bill Clintons and the George Bushes, and he just won't take no for an answer. He just keeps going. I just don't get it. I mean, it even looks ludicrous, like, we have an item on the news and meanwhile President Bush today met Bono. It just sounds ridiculous. I mean, sorry, you met Bono. Like, this sounds like a knacker from the north side or whatever in a rock band. It's ludicrous.
Well, Bono always was committed to the idea that you could make the world a better place. And obviously there's different ways in which you can interpret that and different ways in which you can try and do it. And one is through music and by contributing a body of creative work. But he's never been satisfied by that aspiration on its own.
I'd like to think we scared the shit out of a few politicians because there's an anger on the streets of this city and this country of Ireland, and I want to be a part of that anger.
James Topham is Head of Communications for War Child UK, a network of independent organisations working across the world. War Child helps children affected by war. Bono's involvement with this charity has changed people's lives.
I think the amount of time Bono spends dedicated to causes shows that obviously he's a very compassionate man, but I think the difference between Bono and a lot of people is that Bono actually goes into great detail and he does understand the issues, and he's not just going around kissing babies. He's, you know, I've seen Bono debate with Jeremy Paxman on Newsnight and win, and you know, a lot of politicians can't do that.
We talked about the war in Iraq, but what I wanted to talk about was the war against AIDS. 2.5 million people are going to die next year. 2.5 million Africans are going to die of AIDS next year because they don't have the medicines that we take for granted in the West. This is a war. These are our casualties. And if these people were not African, if they were not black, do you think we would let them die? No.
But it's phenomenal what he's done. I'm convinced there has to be more than one Bono. He can't be in all these places at all these different times, at the World Health Summit meeting for this here and such here, and a global warming here and a this here, and then out with U2 here, and then with some Cindy Crawford there. It's astonishing how he puts himself about. It's not just in out time of U2, it's even while U2 are supposed to be in the studio and Edge is trying to drag him back in, we just stop this George Bush and Tony Blair nonsense. He's absolutely 100%, and everybody will know this. I mean, the evidence is there, committed to what he's doing.
John Bowler is an environmental activist and works for Greenpeace. He was the campaign manager for the Sellafield nuclear power plant protest in England.
Bono and the rest of U2 have been quite involved in the Sellafield campaign for many, many years. I can remember being in contact with Bono back in 1987 on the Sellafield issue.
Love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Get one of these on, please.
Bono and the band took time out from their heavily demanding Zooropa tour to be part of the protest. They had performed the night before in Manchester and endured a 4-hour journey to get there.
They boarded their tour bus. We had about a 4-hour drive up to Cumbria. I remember at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning going from the Solo on board our inflatables across to a small harbour where we picked up Bono and the guys. Shuttled them back across to the Solo. First things first, of course, we all sat down then, had breakfast, had a bit of a chat, introductions all round, people got to know who was who. Then we asked Bono to, I suppose, get ready for the day, kitted him up in his protective suit and goggles and gloves, etc.
Nuclear fly.
Put him on board the inflatables. And then they went across to the beach.
Pretty silly, but all of a good cause.
That would have lasted quite a while on the beach as well, of course. Then they came back to us, to the ship, spent a bit of time talking, wanted to know, were we happy with, how they had done everything, and then they headed off. So very, very long day, particularly for them, given that they played the concert, drove all night, came on board and spent most of the day working with us as well.
I think they're scared stiff. I think that they went to such trouble to cancel the demonstration. Shows they've got something to hide.
I think the big thing with Bono, of course, is he is probably the biggest celebrity that I have worked with, and from the rock world that probably Greenpeace has even worked with. He is someone who has been long-term involved with the campaign, and I think maybe it's his longevity and his staying power with this campaign and other issues that make him maybe special to work with.
Large corporations can bully people like us, people like Greenpeace, and they can attempt to gag us and get away with it. I think actually that has become offensive to a lot of people.
It's a sunny morning.
You see, people, don't forget, he's a guy as well. So when, for instance, if Bono's talking to me about Nelson Mandela, he's just going, man, he's really tall. You know, he's not saying, I met the father of African freedom. Yeah, like.
He's lost it all.
He just is a crusader. He's a zealot. He believes it all and he goes for it. And it's so easy for rock and roll people to slag it, and we do, and people do. Oh God, Bono's off again, this crusade. But not to admire it is actually quite sinful. You have to. It's amazing what he does.
And so I think Bono being committed to that hard-edge campaigning, which is about telling politicians, you need to care as much as I care about this issue, that's what's made the difference.
I don't know how he even gets the access. I don't know how he gets there. And there's enough people who say afterwards, that guy really does know what he's talking about because he's done his homework. And he said to me in interviews that, like, you know, you really do, you have to. When you're talking to your man Greenspan in America, who's the Mr. Money Man and all the rest, you really have to know your stuff, you know? You really do.
Clearly, some people will think that he's very pretentious for doing that, but not enough people are saying the things that he's saying, and we should be glad that somebody like Bono is prepared to stand up and say them.
Tony Blair is, to me, a great politician. He is sincere in his convictions about Iraq. In my opinion, he is sincerely wrong.
U2 are almost unique in the music industry, with each member having an equal share in the band's profits. They make music together. Not one member is above another. But the question must be asked, how important is Bono to the band?
He's absolutely central. They've always projected themselves as 4 equal members of a band, and you know that's the way they position themselves.
I believe Bono's contribution to the band's dynamic is all essential.
And the singers in all bands are always the focal point. Sometimes there's a lead guitar player who's the focal point as well, and the Edge is that.
The eyes are very much focused on him when they're performing live, and he seems to be pivotal to what they do.
You know, you grow up with this thing of the 4 people are U2. They didn't put any ads in Melody Maker saying bassist wanted or guitarist needed or whatever. They grew up together and they formed together and they've stuck together, and they continue to live in Ireland, which is kind of phenomenal in many ways, you know, if you think about it.
All 4 play their part. It's all equally important. Without one individual member, they wouldn't be the band that they are. And I feel that Bono's presence puts them to the forefront, but it's the others that help them stay there.
I've never, I don't think, come across any stories about one of them wanting to do a solo, as you do in most bands.
I think that's one of the reasons why they've survived for so many years, because there hasn't been any splits in the band. They've always stayed constant.
You could take you could take him away from the band and you wouldn't have U2, clearly. More than anyone else, they've said, you know, we're 4 equal members of this band. This is the band that produces it, and everything we do will always be as the band.
One of the most remarkable things about U2 is that you've got 4 very different individuals who have effectively been involved in what is a marriage over a period now of 25 years.
What's in U2's lyrics that have always been, you know, one of the key factors as to why they've been so popular and they mean so much.
You know, you could say, oh, the Edge's guitar, nobody plays angular slices of, oh, shut up. Or Bono can jump with a white flag when he's in his 20s and now he can be cool doing this in front of George Bush. Or I have no idea. I mean, I just don't know. Adam can stand there saying, God, I'm the luckiest man in the world, or whatever. And, you know, what do you call him? Larry can go there saying, look, we still look as though we're in our 20s, because I certainly do compared to the other 3. So I have no idea.
Bono has been a rock singer for over 25 years and incredibly is still on top of his game. However, everyone is very aware of the changing Irish music scene.
And we know how great the Frames are, Ash, the Revs, JJ72. I know how great they are because for the first time I'm starting to feel a little nervous as the names go by. So here's to Irish rock and roll. Thank you.
Bono still lives in Dublin, in the exclusive suburb of Killiney. Bono married his childhood sweetheart, Alison Stewart, in 1982. They now have 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. Bono will always be remembered as much more than just a musician.
Definitely there are more than one Bonos out there, as I said. He definitely is a 26-hour-a-day kind of person, and he is very much, on another level, just a normal Northside Dublin kid, and that's what he was.
So, I mean, he lives in an unreal world, but he works very hard to be a father and a husband and to try and maintain normality. But it's quite hard to do that when you're Bono, because you're always going to be Bono, and everybody is going to want a bit of Bono. And everybody, whether it's even a family barbecue, when Bono speaks, they want Bono to say something significant. Everybody wants to go away with the Bono story. Bono said this to me, Bono did that.
I think Bono will be remembered as easily Ireland's biggest rock star.
And, you know, a lot of the time, Bono just wants to have a whiskey and have a laugh. And that's quite difficult for him. And I think that's why he's kept his school friends so close to his chest, is because they don't expect Bono to say very wise or brilliant things. They're quite happy if Bono gets pissed and falls off the couch.
Maybe what's so special about Bono is the fact that there's nothing specifically all that special. He's simply been given the chance to do this, what he does, to make music, given the chance, therefore, with all his money, to be as humanitarian as somebody in his position can be, and he's grabbed both chances completely and absolutely by the short and curlies, and he's going with it completely. The band is still alive, they're going to do huge American tours, they're going to be on an 11th album, studio album with 25 years into their career, and he's going to go off and save the world as well, because he can.
He will be remembered as one of rock's greatest frontmen, and who has done as much as anybody to expand the potential of rock music.
Would all of the things that supposedly have happened that are good in terms of youth culture or in terms of art or whatever since Ulysses, would all of these things have happened with the reflection on the younger people of Ireland without U2? I have no idea, but what will U2 be remembered for? For being the start of all that, absolutely.
How will Bono be remembered? It's a very interesting question. How will Bono be remembered? The guy with the funny name.
He has ridden his fame to the point where he's been able to branch out from U2 into his own pet projects. But his constant devotion to U2 can never be doubted. They remain one of the top bands in the world, if not the top band.
What separates a good song from a great song?
Great singer.